Well, hello, everyone. I'm very happy to see you or hear from you. I'm Jessica Stern, the Executive Director of Outright, and hello from Brooklyn, where spring is in full bloom and this magnolia tree that I've been stalking finally opened its flowers this morning. I was so excited. Really made me realize this year has changed my understanding of excitement. But please, I was like, why am I not documenting this? This is amazing. My old selfies were a little bit more exhilarating. But welcome. If you haven't done so yet, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, where you're based, anything else you want to share that feels really important, maybe a favorite spring flower. I'll just kick it off by saying we're so grateful that you've joined us to learn more about Outright's new Outstanding Legacy Circle. And many people on this call are current donors, and we want to thank you for all of your support. Some of you are already members of our Outstanding Legacy Circle, and we want to especially thank and acknowledge you for joining this program and including Outright in your estate plans. And if you're new, well, hello. I want to welcome you, and I want to also quickly share a little bit about Outright. We're a now 31-year-old global LGBTIQ human rights organization dedicated to protecting and advancing LGBTIQ rights and equality around the world, especially in places where our community faces extreme persecution, discrimination, and violence. We also invest in places where there can be a tipping point, where dramatic change for the better can be made possible with a little bit of solidarity. We have board and staff in 10 countries, and we focus our work in 3 areas: research, advocacy, and resourcing grassroots LGBTIQ movements. And I want to say that we are very fortunate to have incredible board leadership and expert speakers here today. But first, before we go to them, I just want to say a little bit about this new program. So, what is the Outstanding Legacy Circle? The Legacy Circle is a special group of donors who believe in the global movement for LGBTIQ equality and want to invest in Outright's future through a planned gift from their estate. And this can involve making Outright a beneficiary of your will, retirement plan, insurance, trusts, or other estate planning mechanisms. This is a new mechanism for us. We launched our Outstanding Legacy Circle more formally in 2020 in honor of our 30th anniversary. Why is the Legacy Circle important? Well, the truth is that since Outright was founded in 1990, we have seen tremendous progress in advancing human rights and equality for LGBTIQ people around the world. And these gains have not been accidental. These gains have happened because of dedicated activists and leaders who've made that change happen, and because of supporters who have invested in Outright and our global movement. But the truth is, we have a long way to go to achieve our vision for full human rights and equality for LGBTIQ people everywhere. So looking ahead, we must be relentless. We must be relentless in fighting for a world where all LGBTIQ people can live with safety and with dignity. And we have to hold on to our progress and make sure that it doesn't backslide. Outright as an organization has been at the forefront of our global movement for 30 years. And while I would love to say that we're on the precipice of putting ourselves out of business, the truth is that when we look at realities for LGBTIQ people around the world, we know that there will be ample and urgent need for the next 30 years and beyond. And we can only do it with help from donors who stick with us for the long haul. So I want to thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Chandler Bazemore, our Senior Development Manager, who's going to chair our panel today.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone for joining us. We do understand how important your time is and the fact that you've set aside some time to be with us. We truly appreciate that. So thank you for that. I love being at Outright, and I love one part of my career is to engage donors and get to know donors, to find out what motivates you, what inspires you, and hopefully one way I can do that is share with you the work that Outright is doing. I'm thrilled that Outright has launched this program, and I am more than happy to moderate our conversation today. One housekeeping note before we get started is that we are going to have a Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, please utilize the chat function and put your questions in the chat function, and we will make sure that we address them. So I'd like to start off right now by introducing our panel and acknowledging that not only are they incredibly accomplished professionals and experts, but they're also valued members of the Outright family, as you all are. So as I introduce them, what you're going to find in the chat function are their complete bios, but I want to take a moment to introduce them and to do a little icebreaker for them. So when I introduce you, I'd like you to answer one of my favorite questions is, why do you personally support Outright? So I like to start with Sarah Anderson, and Sarah is a VP at Campbell Company, and you'll be able to see her bio in the chat function. So Sarah, if you can introduce yourselves and answer my thrilling icebreaker question.
Thanks so much, Chandler. I'm really happy to be with everyone today. And as I've learned more about Outright over the past year and change, a newer supporter to the organization, I've just been so impressed with the breadth of work, really around the globe, changing and saving lives, and the different areas of focus that Jessica spoke to. I think, and that focus in particular on kind of tipping points in countries. I mean, it's really an organization that I think understands the work with a depth that is really impressive to me as I've learned more about that. So that's been something that has really motivated me to support the organization and to want to be with all of you today to just be a part of propelling that work forward.
Thank you, Sarah. That's so wonderful. The next panelist that I would like to introduce is Deb Kinney, and Deb Kinney is of counsel at Johnston, Kinney and Zulaica. So Deb, if you can come off mute and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Deb Kinney. I'm an estate planning attorney in San Francisco and have been affiliated with Outright for a long time at this point. It's amazing to watch the organization both mature under amazing leadership of Jessica and her entire team. And just I've actually had the opportunity to be at some of the international events that Outright either participates in or co-leads or something like that. And to see the kind of respect that Outright is given worldwide and the absolute desire of so many people in so many countries to get this kind of support and the strategy and the smart thinking to advance rights in places that are so different from where we are. I know that we're under a little bit of assault on the trans side right now, but all in all, we're pretty secure here in the United States, I think, in our legal rights. And then you see how other people are having to live and not able to even have full functioning lives. And Outright swoops in and makes a difference every time. And the coalitions they've built with other governments and just worldwide partners, they really are, the biggest fish in the pond. So to that extent, I'm a dedicated supporter and will do anything when asked, as Katie, Jessica, or Chandler will tell you.
Thank you, Deb. That was so moving, and we definitely appreciate all that you do and value what you bring to us and offer so generously. So thank you. The final panelist that I would like to introduce is Roger Doughty, and Roger is the president of the Horizons Foundation and a member of the Outright family as a donor. Roger.
Well, hi everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm going to keep this really short because I have a little time later to talk as an individual donor. Nobody does what Outright does it so well, does it so effectively, has done it so long, and has done it on such a rock solid basis of the most important principles in international human rights. And I've just been proud from day one to be to be connected with Outright and continue so now.
Thank you, Roger. And we look forward to hearing more about you and your journey with Outright later on. So a couple of things to go over. What is the goal of today? Our goal of today is to, one, share information about the Outstanding Legacy Circle, two, to give some context about giving in the LGBTIQ community, and three, to share some basics around planned giving and answer your questions and share some personal stories about why some of our supporters have already joined the Outstanding Legacy Circle. And we're going to spend around the next 30 minutes or so asking some of these questions. And I think it will be interesting, inspiring, and most importantly, informative. So we'll try to move on to our questions fairly quickly as well, so that we can open it up to Q&A so that you can answer or ask any question that you like. And again, to put your questions in the chat function. So let's start with a little bit of context. And I'd like to start with you, Sarah, if that's okay with you. So Sarah, you've done a lot of research and work in the field in terms of collecting information about philanthropy in the LGBTI community, and specifically around planned giving. Could you share some of those highlights? And what do we know about LGBTIQ donors and giving to the movement? And how can we know more about the planned giving in our community?
Thanks so much, Chandler. Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit from my experience and to give folks a little sense of some of the data that I'm drawing on. It's coming from a number of different sources. So as a consultant at Campbell Company for the last almost 15 years now, I've worked exclusively with nonprofits around fundraising and communications consulting. And probably my very favorite project, and I'm not just saying this because Roger is on the call, is a project that I worked on called the LGBT Giving Project, which was looking at kind of interrogating the question of how can we as an LGBTQ movement get more folks who are LGBTIQ identified to give to the movement. We knew at the time that based on some of the research that Horizons had led, only about less than 5% of folks who identified as LGBTIQ were giving to some of the largest organizations within the movement. And so we wanted to understand what would motivate donors to give more, what might help organizations be better positioned to bring their cases to potential donors. So that was a project that I think was about 9 years of research, culminating in a great report that was issued last year. I wasn't involved for the full 9 years, but I'll be drawing on some of the research throughout the course of that. It also involved a very specific focus, kind of an offshoot of that work, and a really important offshoot of that work that focused on a task force looking at planned giving within the LGBTIQ community and how we can move that forward. So obviously that's very pertinent to today's conversation. The other piece of research that I'll be drawing on is actually my wife's research. She's a professor in nonprofit leadership here in Seattle, and led a study on planned giving broadly, not LGBTIQ specific, but on planned giving in general. And she studies identity and philanthropy, including a specific focus on gender and sexual orientation and gender identity within philanthropy. So we talk about this kind of stuff a lot, and love to sort of delve into it. So I'll be drawing on some of her research as well. I'm going to throw a lot of stats at you, but then I'll kind of try to wrap it up with a few high points of what we know based on some of what we've learned. So from my wife's research on planned giving in general, one of the things that she found is that the average age at which the general population establishes their first planned gift is 53 years old. About half of people, half of donors who establish a planned gift do that when they write their first will. And the other half usually add a planned gift later when they're maybe revising their will, or they establish another type of planned gift, like a beneficiary in an IRA or a life insurance policy or other forms. And we'll hear more about some of those different vehicles a little later today. One of the things that she also found is that LGBTIQ individuals tend to make their first planned gift quite a bit earlier than the general population. So general population, I said, was 53. For LGBTIQ folks, it's actually 50 years old. And that doesn't sound that big of a difference. It's just a 3-year difference, but it's pretty statistically significant. And one of the reasons, as we kind of think about what some of the rationale might be for why folks in our community might give a little bit earlier, as we all know, until a few years ago, many of us did not have federal recognition for our marriages. So estate planning was even, more important, I think, for many of us to protect partners or spouses and think about, how we were, preparing for our family, to be able to carry on without us. And so, my wife and I, for example, we established our first wills and our first planned gifts when we were in our 20s, which felt like a very early time to be doing that when all of our straight friends were, not even thinking about that kind of thing yet. So that's, one area where I think we are a little bit ahead of the curve often in thinking about those kinds of things. We also know that LGBTIQ folks are significantly less likely to have children. About 2/3 of us don't have children, although that gap is narrowing over time, and will be interesting to see sort of how that plays out over the coming generations. But we know that not having children is one of the biggest predictors of leaving a charitable gift in one's estate. Folks who don't have kids are 3 times more likely than those who do to leave a gift to a charitable organization through some sort of estate planning or planned giving. We also know that folks in our community have opted to support organizations through estate plans and other types of planned gifts, or if they're more likely than the general public to make those kinds of gifts, or if they haven't done it yet, they're more open to it than the general population. So some of the research that we were part of with Roger, we found that Roger's organization had found that 16% of LGBTIQ donors had already committed to a planned gift to an LGBT organization. And another 35% said that they would be open to doing that, even though they hadn't yet. And 16% may not sound like a ton of folks, but if you compare that to the general population, we know that in general, only about 5% of folks have made a planned gift to a charitable organization. So the difference 5 to 16% is pretty considerable there, and definitely, I think, demonstrates that, proclivity of our community to want to support organizations through planned gifts. And when we narrow in on high net worth donors in particular, and look at kind of their charitable giving across all causes, so not specifically to the movement, but looking more generally, the US Trust study of high net worth donors recently found that 37% of LGBTIQ donors in that high net worth bracket had made at least one planned gift intention, compared to 9% of the general population that are still in that high net worth bracket. So again, a really significant difference there that I think shows a lot of potential and interest and generosity of the LGBTIQ community toward charitable causes. LGBTIQ folks are more likely to establish bequests, charitable trusts, and donor advised funds than the general population. Those are sort of the most some of the most popular forms of gift planning in the community. And we're also more likely over time to increase the number of gifts that we have, maybe listed in a will, or the number of beneficiaries on a plan, or to make an update to the amount of those gifts. So, even when those gifts are first established, we're continuing to increase the value and the number of those over time, and continuing to go back to that and to think about the generosity that we're giving to the community there. And then stepping aside from planned giving for a moment and just thinking more generally about some of the things that we know about donors in our community broadly. We know that LGBTIQ donors are much more likely than the general population to support advocacy work. We're more motivated by ideas of seeking to end discrimination and persecution, ending violence and hate crimes. These are things that are motivating and compelling to us, and strong motivation to kind of feel the spirit of giving other folks an easier time than we might have had in our own lives. And I think that speaks so much to the work that Outright does, and the compelling nature of that work, and then really what drives a lot of us who have experienced marginalization ourselves, experienced discrimination in our lives, and want to make the path easier for those who come after us. So some of those motivations around justice and marginalization and discrimination, I think, are really unique to the LGBTIQ community, given our lived experience. I think those factors combined with the demographic factors like not having children or being less likely to have children, certainly I think have led to a general sense and to the finding that we are as a community much more likely to have this generous outpouring of support through our estate planning and the organizations that we support in that way. So again, a lot of statistics, but I think what it all boils down to is that many of us have experienced things in our lives that make us want to give back and to make things easier for those who come after us. And often that is something that we choose to do through our not only our charitable giving in our current gifts that we make, but through our gift planning as well. And it's been really exciting to get to know more about what those stats say and to learn more about what the community motivations are and how that all plays out. But I know we'll have time during the Q&A if folks have more questions about some of those statistics or what they tell us about the community. But there's a lot of other things that we want to get to today, so I'll stop spewing stats at you and turn it back over to Chandler.
Thank you, Sarah. No, that was very informative, and we do appreciate the work that you and your wife have done to collect this data and to do the analysis so that we can understand the place in which we start and where we can grow from. And just a side note, congratulations to your wife on her recent tenure. So we'd like to definitely recognize and acknowledge all the hard work that you're doing for us. So thank you both. And now I'd like to bring Deb into the conversation. And I want to, Deb, if you could share some of your own insights on why estate planning is important from a client perspective, and perhaps highlight some common plan giving strategies and also any unique trends. Deb?
Hi. Well, thanks. And Sarah and Roger for that big project. I know it's been really interesting being on the client side and watching the evolution of plan giving. I've had the pleasure of working with a few thousand LGBT clients on their plan giving over the years, so I've gotten to see a lot. And plan giving is really about the power of the collective. And I explain this to clients all the time. If we all give a little, then everybody's got a lot. And it doesn't mean you need to leave your entire estate to one organization or not give some money to friends who might be in need or things like that. But it's not a zero-sum game. I learned that very early on. And there's always a both and kind of approach that seems to be very successful for people wanting to do plan giving. I'm going to guess that a lot of you are already lifetime donors to Outright and know how to do many types of plan giving. So I'll do a few nuts and bolts, and then we can dive into more of it during the Q&A. But I guess this year has been a wake up for everybody, huh? That you need to have your estate plan in order and updated and take a look at it. And, I used to talk about the proverbial bus that would run us over. Now it's the COVID bus that would run us over. And it's really become real for a lot of us. And it's amazing to me how many people still don't update plans and unexpectedly pass away, and it's not what they wanted. I'm dealing with one of those right now, and it's a heartbreaker. So the first thing I always will suggest is that you take a look at what you've got. I know people here are from many different states, and we even have some people that seem to be expats or possibly not US citizens. So I'm going to talk in more general terms, but in many states we use revocable living trusts instead of wills. Wills have to go through probate. Trusts don't. Wills don't start working for you till the day you die. Trusts have incapacity provisions. In states like California, you don't want to be in the probate court. It's just way too expensive, too arduous, and takes a long time. In places like New York, you can kind of go either way. So talk to your local attorney about what you need to do. But you've got to have your basic documents in place. And for anyone who doesn't have a healthcare directive with a HIPAA release or hasn't updated that in years, I don't care if you're young, old, single, partnered, straight, gay, you got to have your healthcare documents in place, and they need to be relevant. They really do. Those are probably the most important documents you'll ever do. But to get gifts to your favorite organizations, you know, one of the first things we usually look at, and people refer this to a number of times, is an IRA beneficiary designation. And the reason we do that is because most IRAs, not Roths, but most other defined contribution plans are all taxable income. And if you live long enough to start taking distributions, every time you get a check, you're going to owe some money in tax. And if you leave that to any other human, every time they get a distribution, they're going to have to pay a portion of that in tax. And if you do have a taxable estate, I've seen, you know, people get about 27 cents on the dollar out of IRAs. So you think you're leaving them a $250,000 IRA, and they end up with very little afterwards. If, however, you make a charitable beneficiary the recipient of that IRA, they get 100% of every dollar, and nothing goes to the government. So you'd probably much rather leave the humans in your life whole dollars from your other investments, whether it's real estate or stocks and bonds or businesses or what have you. And those defined benefit plans can go to your charities. I'm going to guess and hope that many of you have established donor advised funds by now. That's really a fantastic way to actually do planned giving. Lifetime giving and planned giving, honestly, because you can transfer highly appreciated assets to your donor advised fund. And not only can you then take your time and figure out how you want to distribute it while taking the tax break on the year that you might need it, but you can also use that as the recipient for your planned giving. And you can either write out a note that says, I recommend that, you know, if I pass and my IRA ends up in my donor advised fund, I'd like, you know, outright to get $100,000 a year for 5 years in a row. Or you could just leave the whole $500,000 to outright. I mean, you can do whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you. You can leave it to 4 organizations to split $100,000 a year for 5 years. But, you know, you can have some say in that, or you can leave it to your successor advisors. I personally have left half of it to my favorite organizations, and I put my kids in charge of the other half of my DAF so that they learn to be good stewards and they learn how to contribute back to the organizations that they support as well. And so there's lots of things that you can do to teach nieces and nephews or kids or whatever how to be really good givers by using these mechanisms well. There's also charitable remainder trust and charitable lead trusts. And I don't want to belabor the point, but a charitable remainder trust allows income to humans during life, remainder to charity. And a charitable lead trust does income to charity for life or for a certain period of years, remainder to humans. So depending on your tax strategies, that again is a both and solution, where charity is getting money that would otherwise go to the government, right? And then your humans can also benefit from that. Charitable lead trusts are particularly powerful for people that might be young. You'd like them to get some money later on. But for instance, a charity can get income for 20 years. The kids grow up, they're finally 40, 45, 50, and the remainder goes. So it's almost like a really nice retirement account for them. What else? So the one thing to be aware of that's going to be super interesting this year is the new proposed estate tax plan. So first of all, right now, the estate tax exemption is $11.4 million per person. It's super bad policy as far as I'm concerned. And it does expire in 2025. Biden and actually Bernie Sanders and White House and a bunch of other kind of really interesting progressive senators are trying to bring it back down to 3.5 million sooner rather than later. So typically people don't give because of tax reasons as their number one reason. They give out of loyalty. They give out of a desire to make the world better. They give out of wanting to support these organizations they know need constant support to keep their lights on and keep their work going. But we will have some opportunity to consider the tax ramifications. And as I like to say, you have 3 choices: family and friends, charity, or government. You pick 2 out of the 3, right? So for a lot of us, we would like to see more of our money go to our beloved organizations that are making a difference in this world when it really needs some help, than straight to the government coffers. And so you have that choice. And it's very easy to set up these documents. This is not overwhelming. It's just kind of doing business. And if you can sit down and put the pieces together, it usually makes really good sense. So anyway, I think that's probably enough from me. And I'm happy to entertain any and all questions during the Q&A.
Thank you, Deb. That was a lot of information, but a lot of useful information. And I know I learned a lot there. I think the one thing that really stuck out to me is how you structured your DAF so that you involved your children, thereby creating the next generation of philanthropists. And I think that that's one, it speaks to you, your foresight, but also speaks to sustaining the movement, to understand and empowering the next generation to become philanthropists, to be involved in the process. So thank you for planting those seeds even within your own family. I'd like to introduce Roger. Roger, thank you for being here, Roger. Roger is an outright donor, and I'd like you to speak a little bit about your relationship with Outright, how you became a donor and a supporter, and when you decided and how you decided to include Outright in your estate planning. So Roger.
So thank you, Chandler, and thank you again for the privilege of being here. It's really wonderful to have this chance. So my history with the organization is fairly long. It goes back actually to 1995 when I was a junior attorney who'd become interested in working with refugees, and I found out about the work that Outright was doing, then the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission, in terms of helping people gain asylum in this country. And there were a few things that stood out to me about the organization right away. First of all, nobody else was doing what they were doing. Like nobody. This was a time when Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and others who've more recently become advocates for LGBTI rights, they were not interested. And so this little organization based in San Francisco, was really the path breaker. The second thing is that they were fearless. They were absolutely fearless, whether it was trying to get HIV medicines to people who needed it across borders, to going up against bureaucracies where every door was closed, or foundations that just didn't want to hear it. The organization was fearless. And they were as fiercely committed to that individual who needed asylum as they were to big policy changes, because they felt the movement and the need in their hearts. And then the last thing is that from the beginning, and this is something that I think is carried through, Outright has been very, very clear that when it does work around the world, and when it does work in other countries, that it is not taking the lead. Maybe Outright takes the lead at a place like the UN or other places where there's international advocacy, but always, even in those cases, works in coalition, but is always, always, always tuned into listening to and following what the wisdom on the ground is. And that's become somewhat more the norm, somewhat, in a lot of international work, but Outright was there way before that became the thing to do. And that just spoke, I think, of the bedrock values of the organization. So over time, I had the privilege of becoming more involved and served a couple of rounds on the board. And just during that time, my respect for the organization only deepened. And I actually believe that right now, without question, Outright is the strongest it has ever been. And as was said earlier, great credit to Jessica, and the whole team, the board and everybody else, and all of the donors who have made that possible. It is just remarkable. So when it came time for my husband Royce and I to look at our estate plans, where we worked with a certain estate planning attorney on this Zoom, one of the thousands that Deb has helped, it was only natural for us to include Outright in the plans. And Royce came to share my commitment to the cause and the organization as well. So we decided to include Outright in a couple of different ways. So Outright is a beneficiary from our trust itself. And it's also a percentage beneficiary of an IRA. And so as Deb was saying before, IRAs are the best when it comes to legacy giving. I mean, literally, you get the form, you just get it online probably or from your administrator, and you make a change. That's all you have to do. And then the dollars go, as Deb said, 100% to the organization. We also chose to make our gifts unrestricted. And that is a very important point, I think, when it comes to all kinds of giving, but also to legacy giving. That if there are things that particularly move you, like what you really want to do is you want to support outright, international advocacy programs or something like that, then by all means, go with where your passion is. But for the organization and for the future and the longer term future, the most useful kind of giving is always unrestricted. And I have no idea what the biggest issues or outright priorities or anything else are going to be like, when that bus comes for me. But I'm confident that outright will be there and will know what to do with those funds. Chandler had also asked me earlier, because Horizons Foundation does a lot of work around plan giving, to just share a couple of thoughts a little bit more broadly. So I just want to share a couple of really the wonderful points that Sarah and Deb both made. The first is, we as a movement, as a community, do have a truly staggering opportunity. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling. We have the potential for at least about $27 billion in the next 10 years going to LGBTI organizations from the states. And there's a bunch of simple data that's behind that. I will not bore you with that. But the opportunity that we collectively have is truly enormous. It is transformational. And transformational is one of those words that is wildly overused. This would be transformational. The second is that one of the things that I really love about plan giving is that it is an opportunity for people who aren't necessarily the biggest donors or have the biggest incomes, but really for everybody, including those whose incomes may be such they can't necessarily give all that much, as they're paying their mortgage and doing everything else, but they can leave something behind that's really significant. And so it's a chance for so many more people to do something that's really big and important. And the last thing that I'll mention is that I believe that plan giving allows us to think on a whole nother dimension about our movement, about what we are building, to think cross-generationally, to think about what we are leaving behind for the future. And that's going to be a considerably better world on many, many levels. But if we can also leave future generations some means so that they can deal with whatever is coming down the pike for them, that is a gift that in my mind is transformative of what this movement is and what the community can be. So thank you all for being part of this, and I'll hand it back over to Chandler.
Thank you, Roger. That was so insightful, and just hearing the narrative of your story and how you came to become more affiliated and closer respected with Outright is just commendable. So we appreciate you for all that you do for us and the knowledge that you share with us. So we're going to enter into the Q&A section. So I just want to say again, if you have any questions, put your questions in the chat dialogue and we can open them up to all of our panelists. So I want to open this up to, and for panelists, this is not directed to any one of you. If any of you want to answer these questions, please feel free. But there's some things I want to put out there first. For example, are there anything you wish donors knew about plan giving? Such as, are there any common tax benefits or any other benefits that people might not know about? Something you want to double down on? Is there anything donors can do with plan giving that they can't do through their annual giving? So if you can think about that as well. And some organizations can benefit from plan giving. Why do you believe Outright in particular is a good place and a good option for plan gifts? So I'll open that up to the panel, and please unmute and share, and I will check the questions in the chat.
Well, I could just throw in one quick thing, a little pitch for Outright. I mean, there are lots of super important organizations out there. And, Royce and I have included other organizations, as I assume many of you have, in your plans. But while there's still plenty of room to go, as Deb was noting earlier, in this country, it's not like, we're home free. The situation around the world is so much more complicated and so much more challenging, as you wouldn't be here if you didn't already know that. And the truth is that it's going to be going on for a long time. These things are not going to go away in the next 20 or 30 years. And so when you're thinking long-term about your giving, what a great place to leave. Because even as things move forward slowly and haltingly over time, there's always backsliding that's going to happen, as well. So, Outright's going to be here and it's going to do the job.
The other thing that I'll add is that Outright, and along with some other, very well-respected organizations, when it comes to planned giving, it's really easy to say, I want to leave $1 million to Outright, because you know that they're going to still be here in 10 years. They're going to be here in 20 years. And they're a large enough organization that they can handle large bequests. And their stewardship is always been very, very good around that. And they'll make the most of the money. I mean, it's something that once you've made the gift, you don't have to worry about it. And I see people come in a lot that say, well, I want to leave to this organization, but I don't know if it'll be here in 5 years. And that's when we can use donor advised funds and play around with that a little bit, because it's, and we can also say, if for some reason, LGBTQ people are accepted worldwide and we can travel to 170 countries free people, and Outright no longer exists, they can go to another organization. But, that's decades away. So I think that we, can feel very confident that Outright will do great things with the money.
And the one thing that I'll add kind of to the first question you asked, Chandler, what's something that you wish folks knew about planned giving? Hopefully Deb's comments earlier and some of the different ways that you can make a planned gift demystified some of that for folks if you had questions about that. But one of the things that I'll just underscore is that even though it can sound daunting and there's a lot of different options for how you can support an organization through a planned gift, it's really, most donors find it to be a very simple process. And it's not, once you get into it, it's not as cumbersome as it might seem at first blush. And so my wife's research on planned giving, she asked donors, how easy was the process for you? And 68% of folks said it was either very easy or somewhat easy. And most of the other folks said we're kind of neutral on that. So it's not something that people are finding to be an incredibly cumbersome process. And there's a lot of ways to make that very simple, like the IRAs and donor advised funds that we've heard about, in addition to bequests.
Great. We have a question in the chat, and actually I think it's directed to Deb in particular. They wanted to understand, or if you could cover a little bit of the mechanics and how to include these things in your will. Is there a preference, or do you have a preference of percentage or a specific dollar amount? And the person asking the question wanted you to know that they are a UK donor, so to kind of keep that in mind when you're answering, if that has any impact on your question, on your answer.
Sure. So I think generally the question is, is percentage or a dollar amount? How do you think about that? And depending on the day is probably how I'll give you the answer to that. Honestly, the percentage amount sounds good, because if your estate goes up, people get more proportionally, and if it goes down, everybody shares in that as well. The problem with giving a percentage is, if you give percentage, and think about this especially to human beneficiaries as well, they all get a full accounting, because they need to know that 17% of what, right? So they get to see what you had, how much everything costs, what it's sold for, what the administration costs, and then they get full accountings. And sometimes that doesn't feel appropriate. Like if maybe you're wealthier than you've let on, right? You're leaving someone $100,000. They don't need to know that necessarily that you were worth $10.5 million. You just want them to get $100,000. And if you leave a number, they get a check, and then they get a letter saying, this is a bequest for you, and sent with a lot of love. And same thing for charities too. And charities are regulated by the Attorney General in each state. And so if you leave a percentage, the accountings are required and mandatory and can't be waived. And sometimes that's absolutely the right thing to do, because your estate is a floater, or you don't know what it's worth, and you have private business investments and you have no idea what it'll be sold for later on, or something like that. So it's not a hard and fast answer, but if I had to, at this point, after administering so many estates, I kind of like the hard dollar amount. And then there's usually always a remainder to someone, and that one person or that one charity will get the accounting. And charities on the whole are pretty good, but they do have rules that they need to follow to comply with the charitable procedures. So that's one thing. Now, if you're outside of the US, and the question is, are you a US citizen or a UK citizen or a different citizenship? That will actually affect how you do your estate planning. You can still leave money to outright. You may or may not get a tax benefit if you do it, right? Because it's a US charity. Jessica, do you have any sort of international status on charitable stuff as well?
We have a pathway for gifts for UK-based donors.
That's what I thought. So there are other mechanisms, and again, if you're working with an attorney, they can find out, and I'm sure Katie and Chandler have all the information and can get it to your attorney so that you can actually plug it into your estate plan however you want. But every country is different, and very few countries have any treaties around estate tax that are decent or reciprocal. Internationally, estate planning is kind of a mess. And we have such a mobile society now, and so many more global people, and binational marriages, and some people are recognized and they're not. So it can be complicated. We do quite a bit of international estate planning out of our office. So we've had to do a deep dive into that, and especially with our families that come from all over the world, now live in the United States, or our US people that have gone. Anyway, as you can imagine, there is many iterations of LGBTQ international families as you can possibly imagine.
Thank you, Deb. I think that there is a question, and I'll put this out to anyone on the panel. As someone, if there are people on the call who have not made any steps to establish their estate planning, is there a recommendation of a necessary first step, as far as this is the first thing that you should do when thinking about this? And is there any insight and guidance you can follow through to help establish that foundation?
I would imagine that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I imagine Deb has a lot of really great tips for how to get started with this. So I'll let her speak to that. But one of the most important steps that my wife and I took when we first got started with thinking about creating our wills was really just to have a conversation with one another about what was important to us to be able to achieve through that. Who were the people that were important to us? What were the causes that mattered most? And to really go into that with the grounding of that conversation before we got into the nuts and bolts of vehicles and accounts and assets and all of that, were really just to ground it in what we wanted to achieve through that. So I think that's always a good starting point, whether it's just individually or a conversation with your family.
I think another thing that I would add is when you start thinking about estate planning, think about the totality of your estate. So it's your life insurance, your real estate, your investments, your IRAs. Don't think of it as account by account, not to start with. And once you get a grip on what that number is, and then really sit and think about like who in your life needs what. And there's a knee-jerk reaction in the LGBT community, and I call it internalized homophobia. And I've seen it year after year. And it's when I say to someone, well, what do you want to do with my, oh, just leave it to my brother. Really? And I always say, do you like your brother? And half the time they'll say, no, I actually don't. And I'm like, then why are you leaving it to your brother? You could leave it to outright. And they're like, wow, what a concept. And that's been a great way for people to actually kind of wake up to what it means to leave a gift. It's a gift. It's not an obligation, right? And then they might bring other people into their lives, their chosen family, the people that have been their support the whole time. So it can be, it's a really interesting exercise, if you can have a productive conversation about your values and, you know, your loves, whether they be charitable, human, animals. And that's the other thing I'm going to add. Roger knows that I add this on everything. The biggest competition the LGBT community has for funding our own causes are the animal causes. And it floors me sometimes, because we are the only ones who are going to support LGBT causes. Our brothers and sisters will leave to the SPCA and the Humane Society and, you know, all these other great things. But, you know, here in California, guide dogs for the blind, they're so well endowed that guide dogs have guide dogs. And it's just, you know, we're really at a pivotal point where we need to keep going. And we can't get complacent just because our lives have gotten so much easier in the last decade or two. So, you know, when you're having your next dinner party, God willing, sometime this summer, you know, talk to your friends about what they're doing with their estate plans and what charitable gifts they're making. And you'll have the most interesting conversations, I promise you.
You know, I have just something I'd like to just build on what Deb, you just said, because thank you, that was very inspiring. And I know that, you know, many of us have, you know, different feelings about how, you know, visible or out we want to be as donors, you know, out of modesty, out of not wanting to intrude on other people, you know, whatever it may be. And and you know, everyone has to make their own choice. Being part of Outright's legacy circle and allowing yourself to be counted in kind of a literal way, but also having your name attached, sets an example, and it sets an inspiration for other people. So, you know, Horizons has been building a legacy circle for, you know, for quite a while. And I know that people look at that list and they see, oh, there's Deb Kinney. Oh, there's Jessica Stern. Oh, there's people I know in the community or know of and I respect. And that makes a real difference. And whether it's at a dinner party or in other ways, if you mention to people just in a positive way how good you felt about being able to do something, in all modesty, that can just open up a conversation, you know, without you saying, oh, you must give to this, you must give to that, or whatever. But just as the satisfaction it can bring, as opposed to giving it, you know, to that brother that maybe you don't actually like.
Thank you, Roger, for sharing that. Now we're getting close to our close time, and we want to really stick to our hour commitment with you all. If there are any other questions, please make sure that you add them into that. One thing I would like to say in closing, as you hopefully came to this webinar and are leaving with a little bit more information than you started out or entered in with, and we feel this is definitely a success, but we also want to direct you to joining the Outstanding Legacy Circle. And if that is something that you would like to consider, please feel free to reach out to my colleagues, Katie Hultquist and I. We would love to be able to talk to you one-on-one and answer those questions for you, and also help you to connect to resources. So if you would like to have another conversation with Sarah or Deb or Roger, we can definitely facilitate that. So I just want to make sure and extend the invitation to you that you're not alone in this, and we're here as a resource to be able to help you. So I want to just do a quick check, and actually, Katie, would you like to add something?
No, I was just gonna say there's one more question in the chat from Emily, which is, how would I find the right attorney if I don't live in a major metropolitan area? Deb, do you have any advice about that?
I've had the pleasure of being part of what I call the lesbian mafia for a long time through NCLR. And we have quite a list and quite a listserv. And Emily, if you want to email me offline, I'd be happy to figure that out with you. Katie, maybe you can connect us or something.
No problem. And I think, Roger, you also have a database of advisors. I don't know if they're all in the Bay Area, but I know that you also are connected to quite a number of folks who can probably help.
Yeah, if we can be helpful, we would be glad to with anybody, you know, as well. Although I probably don't have my finger on the pulse quite as much as Deb does in this regard. But please feel free to reach out. If we do anything to help, we're happy to.
That is great. So I wanted to, as we close out, I want to extend heartfelt thanks and appreciation to Sarah, Deb, and Roger for sharing with us your expertise and your stories, and hopefully there are things that we can all take away. And before we close, Louise, I think your hand is raised. Would you like to share something?
Actually, I was applauding, but wasn't ready. They look closely, but I just want to thank everybody. This was excellent. It was really outstanding, and I think very motivational to make sure we all have our papers in order and start really thinking about things. And then some of us do have children that we will be leaving things to, and so it's interesting then to think, how do you, and depending on the size of your estate, how you make those decisions, I think is a good conversation. And the last thing is, how often do you need an estate attorney versus speaking to your financial planner? And you know, you don't have to answer that now, but I know some people work just with their financial planner. Should you have an attorney to set things up, an estate attorney?
That's an unequivocal yes. You need an attorney to look at this. Financial planners are great, but they're really in a narrow lane, a lot of them. And I just got one yesterday where they told my client that his donation to his donor advised fund was not tax deductible and didn't want to change his beneficiary designation. And I had to jump in, and I don't, you know, whatever. But I'd be, yes, absolutely check with your attorney. And you know, you have three legs of the stool, is what they say. You have your your estate planning attorney, your financial advisor, and your accountant. And if all three of them are on the same page, then you're in great shape.
Dan, was that your question, or did you have one last question?
No, I'm good. This is great. Thank you. And thank you, Deb, for that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Dan, did you have a question? You need to unmute.
There we go. I got it now. You can hear me now. I just wanted to really support what Deb had said. I just redid my trust. I just came out as gay 2 years ago. And what she said is so important. And oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And what I wanted to make a comment, because I have an outstanding trust attorney and an accountant and a financial advisor, and the three must work in harmony. One of the things I want to say, which I did with my IRA, IRAs are tax deferred. They're not tax free. So the best way to be able to give to a 501(c) organization is to do an IRA, because you will pay no taxes if it's a 501(c) organization. If you pass it on to your families, they're going to have to pay estate taxes on that. So IRAs are the best way to be able to give to a charitable organization. I just want to support what Deb said about that. That's very important to know. And one of the things that also, when I think it was Roger brought that up, that really impresses me about outreach. I'm actually donating to 3 different gay organizations, lesbian organizations. I'm still getting yes to the LGBTIQ, whatever that is. I'm still getting used to the synonyms of that. But I just wanted to say that I like this word fearless. Outreach is fearless. And I think it's that fearlessness that's going to continue to make us successful. And I'm very proud to be able to share my IRA with this organization. I want to thank Kate, who's been Katie, for helping me. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate this seminar. It was right on. I think it's necessary information that people need to hear. And thank you all very much. And I'm proud to be a part of the organization.
Thank you, Dan. That was so incredible. And I think Dan really sums everything up so nicely. So we're going to close here. Again, thank you all for your time and for your energy and for your interest, and understand that if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us. So everyone, have a great and glorious day, and thank you on behalf of Outright.
Bye, everyone.